Mountains, full of majesty, they stand, often ascending into the clouds, their inclines appearing to move from the earth into heaven. Almost every religion in the world has at least one sacred mountain or more, acting as these monolithic thresholds, liminal places of transition, metaphors of power, great spirits in stone, or even places for the homes of the gods, whether they are the foundations for their celestial cities or their mythic paradises, right? So often we think of Mount Olympus, right? The dwelling place of the Greek and Roman gods, or Mount Kailash, the home of Shiva and Hinduism, and sacred to those of Buddhism and Jainism as well. But these mountains are literally everywhere. With Judaism, we have Mount Sinai, right? Where Moses received the 10 Commandments, or Mount Zion, or Mount Carmel, or Mount Moriah, the place of the Jewish temple, and their, of course, Samaritan kin, countering that God was to be connected to Mount Gerizim instead, right? Meanwhile, Christianity has its own mountains, like the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Transfigurations, and for the Greek Orthodox, Mount Athos. Islam has Mount Hira. Hinduism has Mount Meru. Zoroastrianism has its Hara Berazati. Right? Shintoism houses Mount Fuji and Mount Koyasan, and the list goes on and on. Right? It's so everywhere. Right? Sacred mountains were always places of pilgrimages, places intended for spiritual contemplation and, well, isolation. You remember those mountaintop experiences, right? If you go for a retreat, right, you go up to the mountains, right? And places to encounter the supernatural realm, even to meet the gods. Now, I'm not trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, but the evidence for the importance of sacred mountains really piles up if one really takes seriously all the commonalities, and reveals so much about us as humans and how we perceive the world. Of course, central to the importance of sacred mountains in the beginning is the key idea of animism, that there exists a spirit in all things, whether within a river or a tree or a rock, obviously an animal, and yes, even a mountain. It was a given that there existed a spirit within each mountain that needed respect, in fact, required it, especially if you were set upon crossing over it during a journey or making a pilgrimage to the very top. In many ways, how much of the earlier animism survives within a particular region, will determine how much the actual physical object of the mountain in and of itself is recognized as being filled with an animated spirit of some kind. I'll say this again, okay? In many ways, how much the earlier animism survives within the particular region will determine how much the actual physical object of the mountain in and of itself is recognized or being filled with a spirit of some kind. And you'll see that a lot with, for example, Shintoism, right? So because of their prominence topographically, mountains become connected to regional identities, with the belief that each mountain represented the group of people living along its base. Think of these mountains then as also symbols, each one viewed as being somehow a part of how people understand themselves and what they regard as home. Eventually, this idea moved towards people living on or near each mountain, believing that these mounds connected directly to the spirits of their ancestors, with often those who died from the local community buried along its base also. Ancestors and the spirit of the mountains often merged together, with the spirit not only representing these ancestors, but protecting them as well. Of course, since people were being buried along the base of these mountains, the area around the perimeter were also understood as being the realm of death. The idea that these mountains continued below the earth also made them viewed to connected to the underworld and to underworld spirits. So they connect above to the spirits of the sky, and then of course the spirits of the land, and the idea is also the spirits of the underworld. Eventually, many mountains were not only viewed as actually embodying a spirit, but became more specified, gaining a specific name and understood to actually be a god or a goddess in a sense. To touch or walk upon the mountain was like touching and walking upon the essence of their gods and goddesses. Now, opinions on how to approach this situation varied. For some, they had to be satisfied with simply walking around the mountain and not climbing upon it, for that would be viewed as desecration. We'll have examples of that in a little bit. For others, it was permissible to climb the mountain up to the tree line, but no further, as if that was not enough. A few told how it was not a violation of the spirit or deity to climb almost to the top, almost. But this, there seems to be almost not universal, but quite often, you just have to avoid walking on the actual peak itself. Avoid the very, very peak. You could be at the summit, but not at the very peak, because it's believed that the spirit oftentimes is connected with that exact peak area right there. Interesting, huh? Now, in talk, now to say that, now take a look at mountains in general. Sometimes you see a mountain, and it did have little significance, but mountains are set aside as special and important, oftentimes because of their appearances. Like I said, some cases you're going to see examples of mountains where they're not that impressive, right? Oh, this is really holy. That's true. There's something that happened there. But oftentimes, the appearance is what sets them apart. It's very curious. We humans and tend to gravitate to mountains with unusual features, to elevated places that have, how do I say it, personality, right? So yes, the morphology of the mountain itself is very important, of course. Many average looking mountains, as I said, can be considered sacred based upon where they're located or who lives around the region, to consider them as part of their identity. I take that in mind. But with that said, if a person, tribe, or group can choose between mountains, unless there's some special event connected with it, they will more often than not choose to venerate the mountain that has the most unique formation or shape in their area. Does that make sense? If they're stuck in an area with all these boring mountains, they'll just choose the boring mountain. But if there happen to be one, they'll go, ooh, this one really stands out. They'll choose that one, right? So moving right along. So for example, an oddly shaped mountain face, sharp precipices, jagged peaks, conical or harmonious configurations and the like. We like that, naturally. Any and all overtly volcanic mountains, right? Will be viewed as sacred, especially if they are connected with eruptions that go along with its shape. It's hard to in those, it's hard to avoid the fact that if this mountain's exploding and lava's going everywhere, that there's something sacred or special about it, right? The general elevation of the mountain is important also, or the fact that it stands out where it is located. In places of higher altitude, the taller the mountain, the better, for they will be viewed as reaching to the sky. There is a reason for it, towards the heavens where the sky spirits or gods dwell. But often a pronounced mountain will gather attention if there's no real big mountain around. For example, a mountain or even unusually large hill that is set in the middle of a valley, right, will gain sacred significance. So if it's really flat, everywhere, and you see this mound, they'll go, ooh, that mound, that's important, right? The color of the mountain also may set it apart as sacred, especially if it is made out of stone that is different from the surroundings. The fact that it is always covered in snow, right, will gain spiritual applications connected to white. The more unusual looking, the better the chances humans will regard the image with curiosity and then in turn, devotion. The sacred mountain is believed to contain, as I said, special powers. So the more unusual the vessel, the more such mythical powers are believed as possible. So the well-known historian of religion, Mircea Eliade, speaks much about sacred mountains. She states that, quote, the mountain occurs among the images that express the connection between heaven and earth, unquote. She continues, it is at these sacred mountains within the sacred precincts that the profane is transcended. On the most archaic levels of culture, this possibility of transcendence is expressed by various images of an opening. Here, in the sacred enclosure, communication with the gods is made possible. Hence, there must be a door to the world above by which the gods can descend to earth and man can symbolically ascend to heaven, unquote. As to be expected, while the mountains were the openings to the world above, guess what? Caves were understood to be openings to the world below, of course, because many of these caves just happen to be at the base of the mountains. The idea of the mountain transcending these two realms with the earth in between is reinforced. So you can climb up that mountain and reach heaven, or you can go down that cave and reach the underworld. Mountains will be viewed as a sacred center for power. In many cases, they are viewed as the axis mundi, right? The axis of the world, viewed as places from which the world began. And we'll see examples of that. From the perspective of the ancient mind, as above, so below. So because axis mundi can be seen in the sky in the form of the Milky Way, they often are viewed that its equivalent appears in a ceremonial house in the form of a sacred pole. In this sense, these places are cosmic mountains, right? And you'll see this cosmic mountain idea going right into Buddhism with the stupas, right? The idea of the cosmic mountain becomes very important. And of course, we're going to be talking about this. Cosmic mountain goes into the ziggurat, right? The Mesopotamian civilization, or the cosmic mountain idea. Obviously at pyramids, MERS means places of ascension. So you see that connection there too, but there's others as well. So fascinating. Okay, now, of course, because the sacred mountain is connected to the place of life above and the place of death below, oftentimes sacred mountains are understood as the place between life and death, occupies the liminal place in the middle. Now, of course, the next assumption makes perfectly good sense. For if one is closer to the spirits or gods, to something that is sacred, possibly connected to the beginning of all things upon a sacred mountain, then it must impart wisdom and experiences that are also beyond or outside of our typical understandings. To be removed to this elevated place, a place that is heightened, lifted above from the rest of the world, gives the individual a sense of separateness from the mundane realm below, but a perceived closer affiliation to the world above, right? As a result, sacred mountains become places of revelation. In most cases, height is important. For the higher one is up, the more a person determines he has left the world below him. Meanwhile, the climbing up the mountain can be viewed as a metaphor for this spiritual ascent, this removal from the realm below. And you're going to see this in Hinduism. We're going to see this in Buddhism. We're going to even see this amongst the Greek Orthodox Church in certain places. So it's not strictly an Eastern religion idea. And even an actual process of growing to enlightenment as one moves heavenward. Maybe the air gets a little thinner. And so maybe you're more up to having visions before you pass out, right? Okay, stop the sense of humor now. And the more remoteness the individual finds themselves to be, the closer they believe they are having these revelations, right? So there we go. So where do we start? I mean, how do you start? Well, Mesopotamia is a great place to begin. You're going, excuse me, Dr. Rietveld, I got to tell you something. Mesopotamia is flat. No, I know. And why are you starting there? There's a reason. For those of the Mesopotamian civilization, inclusive of the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Neo-Babylonians, the mountains of the Northwest were the abode of the gods, from where, of course, the Tigris and the Euphrates originate, and they bestowed their blessings of life upon the very dry lands. By the time of the Assyrians, they described these mountains as clouds hanging in the sky that had the sharpened edge of a sharp dagger, which, they continue, even heavenly birds cannot reach. Now, potters through the Near East and in the 3rd and 2nd millennia identified mountains in iconography as chains of triangles. So if you take a look at the pottery images, you'll see that the mountains are represented as these triangles, as opposed, of course, to water, which would be like wavy lines. Of course, from these very same mountains came great threats of invasion from the mountain peoples living there, right? Asdaka, the god king of Medea, who was himself from the mountain, proclaimed the coming threat of the Highlanders in a dream. He says, I was in an unknown country near a mountain that rose above the land, the peak of which was covered with bitter frost. And it is as if I was being told that this was the land of the Armenians. And after I looked at this mountain for a long time, a woman with a purple dress and a blue veil appeared and sat upon its peak. Suddenly, the woman gave birth to 3 sons who were perfected deities. The first, riding a lion, sped to the west. The second, riding a tiger, sped to the north. And the third, riding a dragon, was invading our land. At one point, the god of Babylon, Bel, addressed the god Haik, believed to be connected to Armenia and the Armenians, stating, you settle in hard frost, but make warmer and moderate the cold freeze of your proud temper. Now, you'll see where I'm going. According to Mesopotamian mythology, An, or Anu, which is simply the Sumerian word for heaven, and was understood to be the sky god, was the son of Namu, the mother and primeval sea. Now, Anu went upon the earth and married Ki, the earth mother, who was called the cosmic mountain. So he marries Ki, the cosmic mountain. Now, Ki in turn was associated with Nirnhersak, right? The great mother goddess of the ancient Near East. This goddess, often called Nirnhersak Ki, was declared as the mountain lady, as well as the cosmic mountain and the great earth mother goddess of the Sumerians. So you have this goddess who is an earth goddess, and immediately she is associated with the mountain, a great mountain. And there is this connection between the heaven above and the mountain below, which in a sense is pregnant with life. Got it? Pregnant with life coming together. Meanwhile, so that's one connection. Meanwhile, Enlil, the god of the air who creates the order of things, was also called the Great Mountain. Well, without question, Enlil was initially the most powerful god of the Mesopotamian religion. So you go, okay, I got it. All right, so why? Well, Mesopotamia doesn't have mountains. Oh yeah. So, but they're worshiping mountain gods. Yeah, they are. Yeah, from further on. Yeah. So if you don't have mountains, what do? You build them. Because the mountain concept was so important, and due to the fact that Mesopotamia was so flat, this civilization decided to build their own sacred mountains, which are called ziggurats. These are temples that are often stepped in tiers or spirals, with a small temple covering the pinnacle, intended to represent the abode of the gods upon the mountain peak. That's right, upon the mountain peak. Here the sky and the earth met, at least by the time of the Semitic Babylonians, but most likely shared by the Sumerians before them. The earth itself was a mountain over which the god Bel ruled. This mountain extended down into Ea's region of the subterranean waters and the realm of Anu, heaven above, connected both regions, right, with the earth again in the middle. Because of this view, they regarded the ziggurat representing the earth as the dominion of Bel. One of their inscriptions declares, I laid the foundations of the ziggurat in that breast of the earth, catching the meaning already, and built it up so that its head was in the heavens, unquote. You don't need to have, there's a little assertion there. With this view in mind, think about this. You guys ever heard of the Tower of Babel story? It makes more contextual sense for the idea of building a tower to reach God in a spiritual sense, as represented by a ziggurat, made perfectly good sense if Bel or another Babylonian god is the recipient of this gesture, right? You can see that, especially since they were viewed as more physical in essence. But on the other hand, to make such a tangible monument to perhaps a non-physical deity like Yahweh, that was spiritual, or even beyond the dome of heaven, such ideas would appear as hubris. So you're seeing this tension between the two. Moving right along, okay, so interesting materials here. There's also Ninurta, was the Sumerian god of war, as well as the god of heroes. One of the many stories associated with Ninurta tells how there was a defeat of the mighty demon by the name of Azog, also known as Asaku. You see, Azog was a hideous demon born from Anu, which is the sky, and Ki, which is the earth. But then Agog mated with the Kur, or the mountains, who had offsprings with the Kur, create an army of these stone soldiers. This story is often believed to represent the distrust and fear of the people of Mesopotamia living in the vulnerable plain before the Zagros Mountains. Ninurta is able to stop him using his magical talking mace by the name of Sharu. This mace is able to fly of its own accord after being thrown, and talks with Ninurta as he flies for various instructions. And so you have this connection to the great dragon. So yeah, Mesopotamia, it's all about mountains. So we move on to Egypt, of the mountains. But Egypt, Dr. Riva, again, Egypt is flat. Yeah, it tells you how these ideas are so important, even with these contexts, right? In the ancient Egyptian creation myth, life first emerged out of the sacred mound of Atum. But as we said, that most Egyptians agree that the first god of creation was the mysterious Atum during the Old and Middle Kingdoms, who self-created himself as he emerged from the primordial waters, the waters connected to Nu. He arose in the form of a sacred mountain. Now, there is an exception, there's always an exception. Those living in Memphis, where Ptah was the god who formed the world, he was the creator through the voice. That's the exception. Otherwise, it's Atum. So Atum is a great mountain. After Atum arose from the primordial ocean, he began to generate the world, but just how he did this varies from legend to legend and from time to time. In one version, Atum first created the god Shu, the personification of the air, and the goddess Tefnut, the personification of the water or moisture, through various means, sometimes spitting them out of his mouth, other times sneezing. That's a version where he sneezes out these two deities, or he's does some self-work there and comes out that way. In the latter version, Atum's hand represents his female aspect that is capable of generation. And so this god really is both male and female in aspect, for both are within him. Atum's spittle or semen then creates the gods who will continue making the world. So you see this idea that the mountain is almost a phallus too. Well, guess what? Many ancient religions and beliefs going into Hinduism, as well as others, will view as the mountain as a phallus symbol, especially for those who venerate the god Shiva. Okay. As for the reason why Atum created the world, many Egyptians believe it was because, well, he was lonely, right? He wanted company. Unfortunately for him, his children, Shu and Tefnut, were both too curious to stay close to their parent and left Atum high and dry as they traveled about the vastness of the primordial ocean. I guess not very dry, but feeling lonely again, Atum generated and sent out the Eye of Ra to find them. Fortunately, the Eye of Ra found Shu and Tefnut and brought them back into his presence. I like the story. You'll see why. Atum was so happy to see them again that his eyes were filled with tears of joy. With these tears, then, he formed the first human beings. That's kind of beautiful, isn't it? So humans are created as a result of the tears of joy, of no longer being lonely, by Atum. All right, so let's move along to our first mountain. We're going to go to Mount Akra, and we'll go ahead. Margie, show us Mount Akra a little bit here. So Mount Akra, also called Kalagdok in Turkish, is located precisely on the Turkish-Syrian border, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, rising 5,607 feet to its peak. There it is. It's kind of pretty, huh? There's something like a little mystical going on there. Got to watch out for those clouds, right? Thank you, Margie. In ancient Syria, Canaan, it was one of the most sacred mountains, where, according to Ugaritic texts, Baal Hadad, the great storm god, made his home upon that mountain. Upon the peak of Mount Akra, he built his mighty palace, all constructed of silver and blue lapis. From its peak, Baal Hadad often shot his lightning bolts down upon Yam, the god of the sea, and Mot, the god of the underworld and death. He's at the top going boom, 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 boom. You can kind of picture that from that image, right? It's interesting because I was trying to find another picture, because on the other side is the Mediterranean Sea, and it's kind of cool. You could see where he would be shooting these supposed bolts towards the ocean, right? Now, what happens is the god Anat was also worshipped here, but even before the Canaanite occupation, we know that Mount Akra was sacred to the Hurrians. And according to archaeological evidence, and Hittite records and was known as Mount Hazi. And here again, the storm god Teshub was worshipped on the summit. You're going, why in the world are you having these storm gods? And well, did you guys just notice that picture, right? For some reason, it really does happen. Clouds do seem to hang around the mountain peak. So it does give the people idea that, well, maybe there is a god up there, and he seems to be close to the storms because after all, there's clouds, and you can see where the association would come about. I find that interesting. But anyway, the Israelites called Mount Akra Zaphon. And according to Isaiah 14:13, this is where the Canaanite gods were believed to assemble. Because of its location at the very northern edge of Israel, Genesis 13:14, Deuteronomy 3:27, and Psalm 48 make Mount Akra a synonym for the direction of north. And so it becomes known as Mount North. Canaanite traders often invoked the Lord of Zaphon. A royal scribe dedicated a sandstone relief to Baal in the temple of Baal at Ugarit to this, right? The king of Tyre made a treaty with the Assyrians in 677, and he declared that Baal Zaphon himself as a witness to confirm that this promise would not be broken. Eventually, the Greeks worshiped the Zeus of the mountain Casius here, and the mountain was now known as Mount Casius. The Greek king, Seleucus I, climbed this mountain, seeking advice from Zeus as to where he should locate his future great city of Seleucia. The Roman emperor Trajan was spared from death during a major earthquake in the city, Antioch, during the winter of 1114-15. And in dedication to this event, he minted coins that featured the shrine of Zeus Cassius on the reverse, showing that it featured a structure. So we know from looking at the numismatic evidence, the coins, that there was a structure at the top with a pointed roof supported by pillars, and there was a round sacred stone that was located inside, presumably representing the god. When the next Roman emperor Hadrian arrived upon this mountain to worship, Zeus apparently decided to personally dispose of his sacrifice, sending down a lightning bolt that directly consumed his special offering. Meanwhile, Julian, the last pagan Roman emperor in 363, received an ecstatic vision of Zeus Cassius upon the mountain peak. So you could see, whoa, this isn't a very important mountain, right? It's important to the sky god, and thunder and lightning. Now, of course, by the time you get to Christianity, you see what's going to happen here. Demons were believed to inhabit this mountain in the 5th and 6th centuries, with a monk by the name of Barlaam challenging them by building a monastery here. Now, the remains of an elaborate cult site is still situated upon the limestone peak of Mount Akra, revealing centuries of worship. Now, this is so cool. Centuries of worship by its depth of ash and other debris. You're going, well, okay, so how much ash and debris are on top from all of the sacrifices? I'm glad you asked that. So the debris reaches a depth of 26 feet and being 180 feet wide. 26 feet of debris from all the sacrifices. So when I say they worshiped here and saw it as sacred, I mean it. Now, here's a problem though. This mountain is on the border between Turkey and Syria. Because of that, archaeologists have lots of problems because Syria hasn't been that stable lately. So only the first 6 feet from the Hellenistic era have been excavated. But unfortunately, we'll see what happens eventually. But so I'll be very curious to see what the material remains reveals in the upcoming period of time, as long as the area becomes more stable So let's go to the next mountain. The next mountain is, you guys having fun yet? Is this fun? Are you learning things, right? You know, okay. We're going to Mount Hermon. So Margie, next picture, please. Mount Hermon. Hermon's Hermits. There it is, Mount Hermon. It's kind of a long, yeah, it's kind of a long one. There it is. That's it right there. Yeah. It's 9,232 feet, and its highest point is in Syria. It's always perpetually covered in snow, which of course enhance the sacred character in that region around it. There, that's better yet. Mount Hermon is, yeah, it's very beautiful. Yeah, what do you think? Huh? Very, very large, dominating piece. Yeah, thank you very much, Margie. That's great. Now, about 30 documented temples. You heard that 30 documented temples dot Mount Hermon, along with other altars and holy sites. At the very summit is a sacred temple made out of hewn blocks of stone. The place is called Qasr Antar, and it is the highest known temple in the ancient world. In shape, Qasr, I'll spell it Qasr, Antar, Antar, is a rectangular building sitting on an oval stone plateau without a roof. So it's an open place. An inscription from one of the limestone stelae reads as follows. I'll read the inscription. According to the command of the greatest and holy God, those who take an oath proceed from here. So it's like, okay, so you take an oath, you proceed from here. You guys ready for some fun? I know you are. What is interesting about this taking of an oath is that the book of Enoch from the 2nd century BCE talks about angels under Semjaza taking an oath connected with a curse to take the wives of humanity, which are, you know, the daughters of men. This is all the more important because the book of Enoch identifies Mount Hermon specifically as a place where this oath occurred. Whoa! So many believe this was the sacred mountain of oaths in general, at least for the surrounding region. So this is where you go to make your promise, to make your oath. Many other gods were worshipped here, including Pan by the Greeks and Romans, which is directly connected to the Jordan River, right? So, of course, obviously, this river proceeds out of Hermon, fed by the snow. Zeus was worshipped here with an inscription referring to a certain Therpion, offering stone lions to him, the stone reused in a church near. The Greeks also worshiped the old Canaanite gods as subsumed under new Greek names, such as Theandros, or God-man, who may have been Dionysus or like Dionysus, but having more of a Semitic mixture. Also, Leucathia was another converted over Canaanite deity, which means white goddess, often also identified as Io, the daughter of Cadmus. Fascinating. Eusebius later recognized the importance of Mount Hermon, stating that until today, he says, the mount in front of Panias and Lebanon is known as Hermon, and it is respected by nations as a sanctuary. Now, Eusebius is a Christian writer, but it's still at this time looked at as a sanctuary. In fact, the name Mount Hermon, the name itself, is from the Arabic al-Haram, meaning sacred enclosure. Yay, here we go. I'm sorry, there's a great payoff on that one, right? So there you go, Mount Hermon. Hermon and his hermits. Well, I know there were hermits up there, but maybe not. Okay, so let's go to Mount Carmel. So next mountain, please. There's Mount Carmel. Look at that. Take a look at, this is pretty cool looking, right? You can see really the morphology demonstrates its sacredness. It's kind of pockmarked and sharp, jagged stones. You can see where ancient humanity would take a look at this going, oh, this is a special place. Yes, Thank you. Thank you, Margie. This is fat. I love you doing this. Mount Carmel was one of many locations for what are called high places amongst the Canaanites. In the 15th century BCE, Tutmos III, the Egyptian, lists Carmel as a holy site for sacrifices. So even the Egyptians, who are not even in the area, I mean, they're visiting and trying to take over, were saying this was a sacred spot. There was also an altar simply dedicated to God here. That was, of course, obviously, now this goes into the biblical story, right? It's said to be restored by Elijah, following a contest where he challenges the 450 prophets of Baal to a contest at the altar on Mount Carmel to determine whose God was in control of Israel. Now, according to 1 Kings 18, Yahweh and Baal were to prove themselves by lighting the sacrificial fire placed before them, while Elijah even poured water over his sacrifice. The end result, the prophets of Baal were unable to do so, while Yahweh not only consumed the sacrifice, but the wood, stone, soil, and water. So that's that story. Of course, following this, the long drought ended. The clouds gathered in the blackened sky, followed by heavy rain. So you can see there's a connection to weather once again. Now, Iamblichus, the famous Neoplatonist, mentions that Pythagoras, yeah, you remember Pythagoras, in the 6th century BCE, actually visited Carmel and described it as the most holy of all mountains, and access was forbidden to many. He continues, Tacitus also mentions an altar here in Romans times, and Vespasian consulted this, so that's Mount Carmel, so another important mountain. So now we move on to the Minoans. Now, all about the mountain peaks of Crete, the other, and of course the other Aegean islands, and along the western coast of Asia Minor, archaeologists have discovered many high altar shrines. I will show one that I came upon a little bit. We know from their artwork that the Minoans often portray great celebrations set upon these mountain peaks. Archaeologists have discovered that goats were the most common sacrificial animals upon these mountain peaks, discovering their bones at various places by the altars in these highly elevated areas. From careful examination of these mountain peak holy sites, archaeologists have also detected evidence that great bonfires were lit here. We know from various lamps discovered around these bonfires that they were lit at night. As for evidence of the rituals around these fires, we know as part of their sacrificial rites that they threw various earthen figures into the flames along with their animal bones. Isn't archaeology cool? Right? You can take a look at the material culture and you can really kind of put together much of what happened. Many of these clay images represent various human limbs and other parts, so associated with a sort of healing cult. So if you have an arm injury, you make you get an image of an arm, you go up to the mountain peak at night, you put the bonfire going on there, you do some prayers, you do some dances and celebrations or prostrations, and then you throw that limb in. Hopefully through sympathetic magic, you'll receive some healing. That's interesting, right? Now, this, they even found life-size clay feet were discovered at one place. Examples of peak sanctuaries are Carfi, Petsophos in eastern Crete, and Mount Yoktas. Now, there's one seal. I should have got an image of it, but I didn't. One seal that is definitely Minoan in style, even if it dates from the Mycenaean period, 1500 to 1200 BCE. It depicts a bee-headed goddess and women dancing upon a mountain peak with a pillared shrine clearly visible at top. Nearby, a woman dances under a tree shrine. There is also in the same seal a male ecstatic dancer appearing to approach the mountain peak. At the very bottom is a woman rowing at the base of the mountain, rowing as in, boat. Here, the sacred mountain forms a central element between the sky above, the water below, and the vegetative world in between. You're going to see this quite often. Now, Crete, as well as Turkey, and we're going to be doing a talk about this in 2 weeks, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. They have what is called the two Mount Idas, right? So let's go for Ida number 1 on Crete. Margie, the next one. So Ida number. So this is Ida number 1. So according to Pausanias, the Idaean dactyls, also called the dactyli of Ida, were given charge to protect the baby Zeus from the devouring father Kronos after Rhea gave birth to him below Mount Ida on Crete. So you see at the base of this mountain that you're seeing, this is really a pretty picture. This is where supposedly Zeus was born. Thank you, Margie. Once again, of course, you could already see the connection, Zeus, mountains, right? The Idaean dactyls, of course, we'll talk about next time, but I'll tell you a little bit more. We're very mysterious magical creatures who are not only agents of magic, but also metalworking, living along the lower parts of Mount Ida. And of course, mountains, as I said, were believed to connect not only with the sky, but the underworld as well, mediating between both, much like a sacred highway between both realms. As for the supposed cave that sheltered Zeus, various locations are proposed and, and are densely wooded in some places. So there you have it. Now there is another Mount Ida. So let's go to the next picture. And this is the one that is in Turkey. There it is. That's a pretty one. Look at that. That's a good picture, isn't it? So this is a good one, but this is now, of course, this is the one in Turkey. So you have two Idas, and they're both considered sacred mountains. Thank you, Margie. Here, of course, Adrastia, who is connected to the goddess Rhea and the Phrygian Cybele, was worshipped. Of course, mountains not only represented gods symbolically, but were believed to be infused, as I said, with the power of their spirit, and hence embodying them. The servants of the god Adrastia of Mount Ida, were again the very same Idaean dactyls mentioned in the legends connected to the Mount Ida in Crete. So we're back to these same Idaean dactyls. So I will say one more thing, and because like I said, I don't want to tell you too much because otherwise I'll steal the thunder from 2 weeks from now. But Idaean dactyls were no, actually, I don't want to tell you anymore. Yeah, it's a teaser. Let's put it this way. This topic is so completely fascinating that we're going to devote an entire talk just on this in 2 weeks from now. So you got to come back for that. And you're going to hear materials that you've never heard before. In fact, a large portion of the scholars in this area have no idea about what I'm about to share. So it is definitely a reveal. So let's go on to another one. And this one, it's a short one. So it's such a short, a little bit, even though you think there'd be more, because I could do a whole talk on this. Let's go to Mount Olympus. So take it away, Margie. Mount Olympus. There's Mount Olympus. Now we'll keep this on because it's very short, because there's one more picture that's right before it that we'll look at too. Without doubt, one of the most famous of all the Greek sacred mountains is Mount Olympus, the tallest mountain in Greece, as well as the second tallest in the Balkans, reaching into the sky of 9,570 feet. The jagged, almost teeth-like white pillars of stone at the top of this impressive mountain were formed by the combination of wind and rain. Here upon Mighty Mount Olympus, the ancient Greeks believed 12 Olympian gods made their homes in absolute luxury. Its slopes sculpted by their divine hands following their defeat of the Titans, of which they cast below the earth. Their palaces were said to be scattered about various gorges below the various peaks. You can go to the one picture before it. There it is. According to Greek legend, the gods typically assembled on the highest peak known as Pantheon, Tete Mytikis, while Zeus lived on his own peak directly across the way called the Throne of Zeus, now called Stephani, since he believed his status as king of the gods warranted him to have his own mountain peak. Of course, that would be Zeus. Meanwhile, the 9 muses lived along the northern foot of Mount Olympus near Perea. The ancient Greeks basically reserved these peaks for the gods alone. They didn't climb up here. This is an example of it is forbidden for you to go to the peak. Otherwise, it is sacrilege. The only peak that they climbed of the 3 peaks you see of Mount Olympus is Hagios Antonios, which had a view of the other 2 peaks. And there is where they left the offerings, but they did not dare climb the other 2 peaks because, after all, the gods lived there. Well, Zeus on his own in one peak and the others in the other. Thank you, Margie. Okay, so now we'll backtrack to the one that we were at before, because we're going to Ephesus. So let's see if that shows. So this is my picture, right? This is Mount Pion. So in Ephesus, I have explored many sacred places, including the remnants of such an ancient site upon the edge of Pagos Astegos in Ephesus. Okay, so let's skip. I'm sorry. Let's skip. Let's go ahead. Next one. My fault. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That one. Yeah, that was fine. Okay. This right here is Pagos Astegos, or technically the lower hill just east of it, often called the Hermaean or the Hill of Hermes. Now, during the Minoan and Mycenaean era, this little hill jutted directly out into the sea. You could see right there where, see the deep green there? That's where the water used to be below. And so what it did is it parted the water into 2 directions as it flowed from the Aegean Sea from the west, with the eastern waters going directly to the city of Ephesus and the temple of Artemis, and the southern waters flowing into what would eventually become the Arvalia Valley. When it dried up, it became, of course, the Artiga Gardens. This sacred high place then was a guarded the boundary between the mountain and the sea. And so it was a holy threshold that needed to be strengthened through the sacrifice to the gods should any harm come from these waterway directions. This site continued to be used as a sacred high place where various offerings were made, usually goats, to the Greeks and Roman era. Although much of what you see here dates from 1300 to 650 BCE. And so let's go to the next picture and then we'll backtrack. There, that is, I know you can't really tell much from this, but this is a remnant of a high place where they worshiped the gods. Not much is left. A lot of it is when swept, but still pretty cool. Okay, let's go to Mount Pion. Another very sacred mountain in Ephesus was Mount Pion. Mount Pion was viewed in antiquity as they say, a strange mountain, and numbered by the ancient writer Pausanias as a local novelty about the city of Ephesus along the Cancreus River and the spring of Helletica. When Pausanias states Pion of the mountain, he associates it. This is so important, and I love this because you're not going to hear this anywhere else. because they don't talk about this, but this really does support what I've been talking about. When Pausanias says from the 2nd century BC, Pion of the mountain, he associates the word Pion with Phison. Now, the Greek word physis, could be translated as being possessed by natural powers. There you got it. So it means that this is the possessed mountain, demonstrating, of course, the belief in energies emanating from this particular mountain as a sacred location. Isn't that cool? Yeah, so it is this energy of that has eminence. Now, on the northern slope of this mysterious hill stood a sanctuary of the mother goddess, consisting of niches containing votive reliefs carved on the cliff. These niches are covered with inscriptions, many pronouncing their dedication to the Phrygian mother, who was the, quote, mother of the mountains. The typical votive offering found here, and some still found in the niches, apparently undisturbed since antiquity, featured the enthroned or standing goddess in the center with lions and Tepanian, flanked by an old bearded god, probably Zeus, and a young god clad in a chiton, sometimes with an additional petasis. And the young god is ambiguous. He may be Hermes or Apollo. Both ideas are supported by the inscriptions. That the site was still active in the Roman imperial period is demonstrated by the ceramic findings. Now, further up from the sanctuary of the mother goddess along the steep incline of the mountain, Austrian archaeologists discovered in 2008 yet another sanctuary dedicated to the mother goddess, overlooking the northern corner bastion of the Hellenistic city walls and positioned upon a terrace. Dating from the 3rd century BCE, this sanctuary still retained 14 marble reliefs of the goddess Meter, 4 of them in their original locations, as well as dedicatory niches. Most of the reliefs depict either the standing or enthroned mother goddess. Once again, she is understood as the Phrygian mountain mother, once again, right? Other than that, of course, we can go further here, is Mount Pion possesses other curiosities as well. Let's go to the next picture.
Backwards or forwards?
I think forwards. There it is. Okay, so this is a picture you will never see. This is inside of Mount Pion. So you go through a cave and it opens up in the center, and there is like a little grove there that was a sacred center. It's like the donut hole, right? About Pion. Isn't that cool? So worshipers would go here and do their various practices and so forth. I thought that was cool. There, of course, was a shrine dedicated to Mater or Cybele. There are bats everywhere here, but again, this is the very interior of Mount Pion. A poem dedicated to Mount Pion survives as written by Claudia Trofime around 92 or 93 CE, full of obscure natural allusions, but manifesting many intriguing possible applications. So this is the poem dedicated to Mount Pion, who was understood as a god on her own. Okay, here it goes. As a thief in the night, Pion drinks the rain which falls from heaven. On all sides it contains water, as much as the sea. Would that someone would reveal of you, who maintain the divine life, how you in yourself maintain a trace of the beautiful measure. Wow, that's beautiful, right? So it's interesting because Mount Pion is shown even on coinage as a deity. So it is it's not just a mountain, it is a god. which is connected to the gods. Okay, thank you, Margie. I'll say a few more. There's no picture of the next place. The next course mountain is Mount Salamisus, which is important to the Ephesians. This is where Leto gave birth to Artemis and Apollo in the holy grove of Ortygia, just below. And of course, we'll talk more about that later. The house of the Virgin Mary is on top. Now we're ready for another one, another picture. Now this is a real good one. This is Mount Ararat. Wow, look at that mountain. Isn't that magnificent, right? Okay, what we know today as specifically Mount Ararat in Armenia was actually known by the Armenians in ancient times as part of a collective sacred mountains known as Massas in the region of Ararat. It was here, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Gilgamesh, in search of immortality, went about a mountain called Mashu in the northern end of the world, through which the sun rose and set. According to the biblical account, it was upon this collective of mountains called together Mount Ararat that Noah's Ark came to rest after the great flood. But more and more, one particular double peak mountain stood out from the rest of the region. Thank you, Margie. And this became known as Mount Masus, and later on would be known as Mount Ararat. For the Armenians believed that Noah landed on some other mountain further to the south of their region. Strabo in the 1st century mentions the double peak of Masios as positioned on the eastern Taurus range and dividing Armenia from Mesopotamia. The double peaked volcanic mountain was indeed sacred, often called Astan Masas, which means in Old Armenian, holy or highborn and free. The higher of the two peaks was considered the most holy, believed to be the place where the sun went to rest each and every night. Also, it was from behind this peak where the Kaj were born. These are the Armenian gods who are deemed the protectors of the king. The mountain peak is considered so sacred, that all were forbidden to climb it. And so most did not, creating a taboo that was followed for centuries. Meanwhile, the base of the mountain was considered dangerous, for here the kingdom of dragons and snakes happened to be positioned. One of the volcanic craters located at the base of the mountain gave credence to this belief, with many believing this was the entrance to the realm beneath the mountain. The smoke coming from the crater and the earthquakes gave the impression that dragons were down there. The volcano erupted every now and then. For example, once between 2500 to 2400 BCE. Then it happened again in 5050 BCE. Then in 1450 CE. Then in 1783 CE. And the last time in 1840. Wow, 1840. The last of which actually killed about 10,000 people. So people don't realize that this is an active volcano. The river directly coming from this area is called the Sivjur, which means black water. The river arriving from the other side was called the Ginoget, which means the wine river. For it was upon these banks that the Armenians believed that the grape was first cultivated and where wine was first drank. While the Sevjur, arriving from Mount Massas, was of the dark underworld, the Ginoget was associated with paradise. So this is cool, right? So you had the water of the underworld and you have the water from paradise. Here resided a spring that could heal almost every ailment, they believed. Later named for Saint Hakup. In essence, Mount Ararat had 3 parts, which were typical for Armenian ancient understandings of the world. You have the heavenly summit, where the gods reside and the heroes. The middle world, where humans reside, and of course, at the base, the dark world, where the dragons dwell. Stories about dragons living at the base of the mountain became very popular. And there's a whole bunch of stories here. They're pretty gruesome. So we'll just keep going. So now I do want to say that the Armenians did not think that this was where Noah's Ark arrived at. That understanding actually came later on when Christians from the Latin West were attempting to free the Holy Land. They embraced this idea that Mount Mossus was indeed where Noah's Ark landed. By the 11th century, the returning Crusaders told how Armenia was the holy place where the Ark located. And the Armenians, of course, are wanting to get the trade. They're all, because the Armenians thought that, yeah, there's a region called Ararat, but it wasn't this mountain. It was further to the south. But when the Crusaders were believing it, and the Armenians are going, well, we need their trade, pilgrimages, revenue. So suddenly they had this change of heart. Yeah, that's the story. That's where Noah was. And so that will surprise everybody, right? So it's a you just can't make this up. Okay, let's get to the next mountain. The next mountain is Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, also known as Mount Horeb, is both the name of a sacred mountain of the Israelites and an actual mountain located on the Sinai Peninsula. This one was about 7,497 feet. It's also known as Jabal Musa. Now, of course, there's many Mount Sinai's. So is this really it? I don't know. This is the one they end up believing. We'll go into that. Well, thank you, Margie. The word, by the way, most scholars assert that the name Sinai is actually derived from the Sumerian word Sin, which is the god of the moon, whose worship is evident, especially at and by those in Haran. And so what will happen is that you'll have Sin, and this was also the name of the moon god in southern Arabia. But with the moon god in northern Arabia, where Sinai is, excuse me, it was a moon goddess that was worshipped, and so it was feminized, and so it became Sinai. Sin, Sinai. So many scholars say that Mount Sinai was then dedicated to a moon goddess. Of course, William Albright disagrees with such a designation. He's a famous Israeli scholar, and he believes the word arises from Sina or Sanya in Aramaic, which it has to do with the idea of something that's burning and maybe is understood as, or burning with the idea of hatred. So I'm not sure if I like that definition, but we just keep on going. Rabbinic traditions also call Mount Sinai Har Alhim, meaning the mountain of God. Upon this mountain, God was said to have revealed himself to Moses, while the rest of the Israelites encamped below. Of course, the question lingers, is this it or not? We don't know. Now, obviously, this mountain is connected to where Moses received the 10 Commandments. Now, we do know that this was identified as the Mosaic site by the 3rd century CE by Eastern Christians, and St. Catherine's Monastery was established here in its shadow. So there you have it. Josephus states that Sinai is the highest of all the mountains thereabout, and this is one of the highest ones, so maybe this is the supposed place where they believed it happened. See, I'll be careful about that. Now, according to traditional reckoning, Moses arrived at Mount Sinai with the Israelites 2 or 3 months after leaving Egypt on the day God gave the law to them, which is, of course, Shavat, also known as the Feast of Weeks, and also known as Pentecost, the 50th day. So this is the idea of the receiving of the law. Of course, the 10 Commandments were there. But what I want to stress upon, there we go, is that today, the Ashkenazi communities, those descending from Jews originated around the Rhine River area, have a special observances on Shabbat that is important for us to remember in this connection. Now, there's one part where it talks about, here it is. Yeah, I like this part here. Here. Okay, so I'm skipping sections if you want to know what I'm doing here. Okay, so they are instructed in one part to decorate their homes and synagogue with greenery. Now, this tradition is first mentioned in the Midrash, where in preparation for the arrival of the law from God, nature was believed to basically kiss the slopes of Mount Sinai with flowers and lush vegetation, making a very direct connection between God's arriving power and nature's fertility. Does that make sense? So here you have this barren Mount Sinai, and well, God's law is coming. And so what happens is this mountain becomes fertile and lush as it receives the law. Got it? This mountain. Now, many synagogues decorate the bima with flowers and plants in the design of a traditional Jewish wedding canopy, chuppah, intended to symbolize the marriage between bride, the Jewish people, to the bridegroom, God, via Moses, who is the matchmaker. Of course, the marriage contract is the Torah itself. And so what happens is that you have this interesting mixture between ancient religion and this mountain. Are you seeing it, right? And how it becomes fertile, ready for God's gift and open to that. You feel that there's that sense of fertility, of pregnancy, these ancient mountain images have. So in some cases, these mountains are connected with the phallus. In other cases, they are the breast, or they are the pregnancy, the fertility, or the yoni, right? The receiving, getting ready, getting ripe. So there is lots of sexual metaphors here. Okay, so there's others, of course, around connected to this mountain too. Of course, you have Yom Kippur, and we won't go into that. Another sacred mountain that I have to bring up. So let's take a look here. It's Margie. It's the one that shows the mountain. The next one. Here it is. Okay, so here we have the next mountain. Of course, is the Temple Mount. So Temple Mount, of course, is holy to not just Judaism, but also Islam as well as Christianity. I just want you to keep your eye on here. There's the Dome of the Rock. This is the top of Mount Moriah. This is where the Rock of Foundation is. You can see right across the way, there's the Golden Gate. And on the other side, you have the Western Wall, which is the most holy site of Judaism. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this will be extremely interesting. So please follow, because it's not what you think it's going to be. So the site of the Jewish temple of Mount Moriah rests upon what is called the foundation stone, considered sacred by both Jews and Muslims. According to Jewish belief, the foundation stone was mystically located at the very center of the universe, of both heaven and earth, and was a place of reverence to the point where many Jews, even today, pray towards the stone in a directional sense. The Midrash Tanhuma, written in the Roman era, has the following to say about this foundation stone. So this is from the Roman era. It says, as the navel is set in the center of the human body, so is the land of Israel the navel of the world, situated in the center of the world, and Jerusalem in the center of the land of Israel, and the sanctuary in the center of Jerusalem, and the holy place in the center of the sanctuary, and the ark in the center of the holy place, and the foundation stone before the holy place, because from it the world was founded. So the world began, according to popular Judaism, at this foundation stone, at this mountain. And you can see this harkens to very ancient beliefs, right? Because we know that this mountain, Mount Moriah, used to be sacred to El, which is, of course, the sky god, right? The sky god of the Canaanites. And you have this connection with Melchizedek, right? Who was the priest, right? The priest that Abraham met. Remember this, And it turned out that their worship is the same. Well, it turned out that a lot more was brought in than we know when it comes to these beliefs, right? So what happens here is that according to some ancient Jewish religions, the divine name of Jehovah was actually inscribed on the foundation stone itself. The book of Ecclesiastes proclaims that God, quote, has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has set the worlds in their heart, yet so that man cannot find out the work that God has done from the beginning to the end. And what happens is an Aramaic translator of one of the manuscripts adds the comment, this, he says, this hints of the divine name of the foundation stone. The divine name was engraved on the foundation stone, and the Lord guarded it in great secrecy so as not to arouse the evil inclination in the hearts of men who would desire to know with help all that shall come to pass in the end of time until eternity. So you have this idea, this stone, this foundation stone would have the holy name of God on it. And this, of course, makes sense because this is the idea of how everything starts. Now, you can imagine all the ancient stories that surrounded this alleged name of God on the stone. According to one story, when King David dug the foundations of the temple, he was not permitted to actually build the temple, right? Because, Bathsheba, his son Solomon did that. He encountered the foundation stone positioned at the opening of the great abyss. And upon this stone, he was the one who first discovered the very name of God upon its surface. Of course, fear arose amongst many, especially the prophets and priests, according to the story, worried that those who are less mature may attempt to learn the holy name and be able to destroy the whole world through its power. So to protect this stone, the name, what happened is what they did is they placed 2 iron pillars topped by lions to guard the entrance of the Holy of Holies, where the foundation stone was situated. So that's kind of the story. Well, so thus the idea is if you go in there and you see the name of God, and what will happen is that the lions will roar and you'll immediately forget. That's the idea. Of course, another Jewish story tells how Jesus of Nazareth secretly entered into the Holy of Holies, copied the name on parchment, cut his flesh, and hid the parchment under his skin, so that when he walked out and the lions roared on top of the pillars, even though he forgot the name, he got out with the name written down, and that's how he gained his power. So, yeah. Of course, the Talmud, the foundation stone, was not only the site where Abraham almost sacrificed his son Isaac, but it was also the spot where God gathered the earth that will be formed into Adam. So the very earth from Adam came from this too, as well. Furthermore, Noah was believed to have sacrificed here, according to popular Jewish belief. Obviously, this is not canonical. This is popular Jewish belief, or in the Talmud too, though. Now, even, of course, Jacob is connected with this as well, the house of God. According to the Zohar, the world was not created until God took a stone called Even Hashaya and threw it into the depths where it was fixed from above till below and became the Holy of Holies. And this was that very same foundation stone. So very, very important, very significant. Now, what will happen is you're thinking, okay, we're just talking about Judaism here. No, we're actually talking about Islam. What? See, according to Muslims, the foundation stone is connected to the Prophet Muhammad. Here, Muhammad was believed to have stepped upon this very foundation stone when he arose to heaven upon his horse, right? Receiving special guidance from God in the third heaven. This is often called the night flight or night travel. Muslims at the site will often point out a dent in the rock and say this was made by the hoof print of Muhammad's horse at the moment of his departure into heaven. The belief in this event by Muslims is pivotal because during his ascent into heaven, Muhammad encountered other prophets throughout history and was recognized by them as the ultimate and final prophet. According to Muslims, this is the moment when he receives the witness by all previous prophets and the final seal. And as a result of that, this becomes the third most holy site of Islam. Mecca, Medina, this Mount Moriah, which is the foundation stone. You're going, wait a second, that's pretty, yeah, it's pretty big. And of course, think about it. The Jewish temple was built on top of Mount Moriah. So this was the holiest site. So don't tell me that sacred mountains are not connected to the Abrahamic religions. They are, right? The temple itself was built there and was destroyed in 70 CE. There's a leftover on the Temple Mount. That's, of course, of the Western Wall, which is, of course, obviously today the most holy site of Judaism, right? Now you're thinking, okay, well, that's it, right? This holy mountain. No, we're not done yet. What? Because Christianity, huh? You see, you have the Golden Gate. The Golden Gate is the entrance into the area of the temple. But in Jewish belief, going back, this will become the place where the Messiah will come through at the end of time. In many cases, this will be Elijah, right? Well, then it turns out in Christianity, they have Jesus as depicted as going through this Golden Gate at the end of his ministry, the week before his death, right? And so you have, once again, oh, he must be a Messiah. He's going through this gate, which of course makes this a very holy site to, yes, Christianity. In fact, according to many Christian beliefs, at the very end of time, the Messiah is going to be coming through this very gate, landing on the Mount of Olives, going through the Kidron Valley, and then through this Golden Gate, right? And this will be the end of the world. Where's this Golden Gate now? Supposedly destroyed in 70 CE, but you know, those Romans, they were lazy, and they just buried it. How do I know? Because I seen the original Golden Gate. I saw it in 1986. I slipped between the stones, went down and saw it, and Professor Dr. George J. Kamikas also saw it. So basically the Romans were going, oh, I'm tired of destroying Jerusalem, and they flattened up the top. So you can see the keystone kind of going like this, but the rest of the original gate is down below. Woohoo! Yeah, interesting. So apparently it's there. So there you have it. All these sites considered holy. Now, we're going to go on to the next picture. I know we have to increase our speed a little bit. It's not an exciting one. Yeah, there it is. That's the Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives is another holy site. It is directly across the way from the Temple Mount. Yes, it is yet another holy site. I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit here. Thank you, Margie. Okay, so the first biblical reference to the Mount of Olives occurs in 2 Samuel when David is fleeing Absalom. And of course, here David found refuge. But in particular, this was a worship place for the gods of Moab and the worship holy mountain of the gods of Ammon. And that was a special high place dedicated to them. The practices of worshiping pagan deities upon this mount continued on and off throughout the time of ancient Judah. And because of this reason was even called the Mount of Corruption until King Josiah destroyed, quote, the high places and where before Jerusalem to the right of the Mount of Corruption, which Solomon had built for the Asherah, the Zidonians, and so forth and so on, which of course you already figured out by now. It was also a holy site dedicated to Asherah, right? So the goddess. Now, of course, Asherah is the Canaanite mother goddess as well, and she is connected to this the sacred tree too, and was the wife of El. What I find is interesting is that where Asherah was, I'll just say this. There is in the southern section of the Mount of Olives, this holy grove. This holy grove has olives, olive trees everywhere. This is where we have found evidence of the worship of Asherah, is in this particular area. It's interesting because this holy grove became a holy grove even to the Israelites. And so what happened is this, is when the Israelites needed to have their special holy olive oil for their lamps, this is where they would get it from this grove. And then, of course, after 7 to 8 days, obviously it would be, it'd be ready for usage. Does that make sense? So you see this other ancient connection. I could go further onto this, and I want to, but I just simply don't have time. I will just mention that popular Judaism going into the Middle Ages will hold that the soil is sacred from the Mount of Olives, and will use this soil for various curative mixtures. So I wish I could go further to this. I have the notes. You can ask me afterwards. Also, obviously, this is the place where Jesus was believed to ascend, and after the resurrection, and Christians believe that he will arrive back. So talk about a holy mountain, right? Where he ascends and where he descends. There is another mountain that's called the Mount of Transfigurations. And of course, this one is a place of epiphanies. This is where Jesus is said to reveal his deity. The earliest identification of the Mount of Transfigurations as Mount Tabor is by Origen in the 3rd century. Jesus goes up into the high mountain with Peter, James, and John, and is transfigured before them, with his face shining like the sun and his raiment turning white. Jesus talks to Moses and Elijah upon this mountain, and disciples wish to make a tabernacle to each. A bright cloud, and the voice of God is heard declaring Jesus as his beloved son. This is in Matthew 17, 1-9. Those within the Eastern Orthodox Church were to remember this event, for it was an example of humans being able to see the energy of God himself with their own physical eyes, while not being above, not seeing his essence. This experience was still to be understood in connection with seeing the energy of God through the Hesychast prayer. So once again, very important. Mountains as epiphanies. I don't have time. I just will just say that Mount Athos is also considered a holy mountain by Eastern Christians, especially Greek Orthodox. And they will tell stories about climbing a mountain or climbing up various ladders to get to God. Your own stairway to heaven, shall we? All right. I will also mention there's another sacred mountain that's called Mount Hira. This is located 2 miles west of Mecca. Mount Hira is believed to be the mountain where Muhammad first has revelation from Gabriel, taking shelter within a cave here. The mountain has a very distinctive round shape and rises about 2,080 feet in the air. While not considered as a mandatory part of pilgrimage of Mecca, many Muslims believe to visit the mountain is very much a reward. And of course, but there are other Muslims that say that you shouldn't visit. This is interesting. There are other Muslims that say, no, it's haram, because after Muhammad visited this, was here, had his revelation, he never came back. And so it is forbidden. So you're seeing these common themes here, right? You should go to this mountain, or no, it's forbidden. You can't. I had to get here. There's a few places I need to get to, and that is, I wanted to get to Mount Kailash. So Mount Kailash, there's a few. I want to get to Hinduism a little bit, and I want to make sure I talk about a few indigenous stories. So I'd be remiss if I didn't. Mount Kailash is located in Tibet, and Margie, I guess I'll show it, Margie. We'll be in sync in a few seconds. That's it. That's Mount Kalish. Isn't that an interesting looking mountain? Just the morphology is simply amazing. Okay, thank you. It's unusual. I mean, it seems to have like a perfect dome, and snow is always upon it. It gives you this feeling of purity and light. Naturally, it really stands out in respect to the plateau around it. Mount Kalish is also the source for four rivers. The north connected to the Indus, the east to the Sangpo, the south to the Karnali, and which leads to the Ganges, and the west to the Sutlej. So it is a prominent place. These four rivers are obviously connected to the four cardinal directions, and in turn are described as being like the arms of a mandala. I love that. Because of that fact, and that it stands out almost alone from all surroundings, Mount Kalish is easier to walk around, giving rise to many practices due to this ability. You saw it just kind of stands out, and you can walk around it. Concerning Mount Kalish, Hindus believe that this is a sacred mountain of Lord Shiva, known as the destroyer of ignorance, where he sits deep in meditation when not active. And you can kind of see him sitting on top. The Vishnu Purana, written around 300 CE, describes the four sides of Mount Kalish made of four different stones, right? Yeah, and somebody just mentioned it sounds like the Garden of Eden. Yes, it does. That's very good. As you can see, these traditions are very, there seem to be, of course, they are all, you have these oral tradition moving through, right? So you have these four different stones. You have crystal, ruby, gold, and lapis lazuli. Obviously, I don't think they have these sides, but there you have it. For Buddhists, Mount Kalish is sacred to the Buddha by the name of Demchok, who had four faces, all of them blue, who embraces the wisdom of ecstatic bliss. For those who follow the Jain religion, Mount Kalish was a place where their first prophet received enlightenment. I mean, this is really important. Those of the mysterious and shamanistic bone religion, Mount Kalish is known as the Swastika Mountain. And here upon its peak rests the seat for all spiritual power. In fact, the Boni believe that their founder descended from heaven upon this mountain. Mount Kalish is also connected historically to tantric mysticism. In some cases, Mount Kalish is the manifestation of Mount Meru, around which the universe circulates. Now, pilgrimages to Mount Kalish have been going on for at least 1,000 years. There is also a tradition that if one goes around the sacred mountain, it means good luck or gain merit. This ritual walk is called the Kora. Now you're going to have to walk 32 miles around. Of course, which direction one should go to circle it is disagreed upon. For those who are Hindus and Buddhists, one should proceed clockwise, but for Jains and the Bone belief system, one should walk counterclockwise. Maybe one group is undoing what the other group is doing. I don't know. Sorry. Sorry, stopping. Now, also many believe that the circumambulation must be completed within one day. 32 miles in one day. This is quite a challenge. Those especially devout make prostrations all the way around, bending, then kneeling, and then prostrating themselves in full body spread, making a sign on the ground. This will be a little bit painful. If one chooses to do all the prostrations, an estimate of 20,000. If you want to do 20,000 prostrations, you guys want to do that? Yeah, 20,000 around 32 miles. The pilgrim will be required to spend another 3 weeks there. For those who complete this Kora 13 times, they gain a special privilege, for they then can do what is called the inner Kora. What the inner Kora is, opposed to the outer Kora, is then after doing all that 13 times, you now ascend straight up the south face of Mount Kalish to the cave of the Golden Chotans, which is about 19,500 feet up. So that's, wow. Okay. Another mountain, a sacred mountain, is dedicated to Shiva, is called the Arunchala. So next picture, Arunchala. You know, the talk is going to stop because the water's going out. So next, there it is. That's a pretty one. I like that one, which is located in southern India near the east coast of Tamil Nadu and constitutes one of the 5 main Shiva holy sites in the south. As for how the sacred mountain was founded, the story goes that Brahma and Vishnu got into an argument over which one of them was greater. Weary of this conflict, Shiva was said to suddenly burst into this incredible pillar of light, revealing his power, with a voice saying that whoever can find the ends of this pillar would be supreme. But neither could, and this shaft became the mountain of Arunchala. So there it is. I love it. The next one, let's go to the next mountain. Less impressive, but this is the Govardhana Hill. This is sacred to those who venerate Shiva. Now, this one is here the celebrations. The Govardhana Puja occurs, which is the day after Diwali, right? According to the belief of many Hindus, on this day, Krishna, viewed as the supreme head of the Godhead, defeated Indra, the god of thunder and rain. The story goes that when Krishna saw farmers and villagers preparing a big offering to Indra, Krishna said that they should follow their dharma and not busy themselves with prayers for natural events. Now, Indra realized they were listening to Krishna, and when they acted on his advice, on Krishna's advice, Indra was not very well pleased, and he tried to flood the village. But Krishna lifted up Mount Govardhana to protect the people from the rain, this particular mount that you're seeing right here. The result, Krishna was proclaimed as supreme over Indra. It is believed that by residing along the foothills of Govardhana Hill, devotees realize the dramatic increase in their senses as their souls are purified. They believe through participating in the energy of this mountain through Krishna that they attain towards divinity, becoming more devoted to Krishna as a result. Many believe that the Govardhana Hill is directly connected to the essence of Krishna himself, so that even the stones laying about the mountain can be worshipped without any special rituals. Krishna was said to lead the villagers in their first circumambulation around the sacred mountain. This ritual is observed today, being about 14 miles all the way around, and takes about 5 to 6 hours to complete. And of course, it has all its sacred sites around it. Thank you very much, Margie. That's great. I do want to say that this idea of sacred sites, of course, sacred mountains goes into Buddhism and the formation of a stupa, which I will talk about some other time. I will also say in passing that, well, I guess we'll just go to the next one because this is very short. Let's go to Shintoism and to Mount Koya. There's Mount Koya. Yeah, thank you. Because of the nature of Shintoism, spirits dwell in all natural things, including mountains, being in many ways close to a pure animism from ancient times. As a result, all mountains are sacred, but some are more sacred than others. These mountains can inspire as well as to make one fear them. For those who follow what is called Shingon Buddhism, their sacred mountain is Mount Koya, where their founder Kobayashi began their movement. Shingon Buddhists will eventually make Kobayashi into a mythical and even magical sage, with one story telling how a certain village did not have sufficient water to irrigate their fields. That is until Kobayashi comes to town, and after the villagers gave him something to drink, showing their generosity, since they had so little themselves, he suddenly struck the ground with his staff, and a spring of water came instantly gushing out of the ground. According to legend, Kobayashi did not die in this life, but continues to live somewhere in the vicinity of Mount Koya. awaiting the appearance of the next Buddha Maitreya. So people will do Komodachi sightings. It's not like Bigfoot sightings, but it's like I think we saw him. Now, of course, he'll be there until the next Buddha, Maitreya, who is still yet to appear upon the earth. Of course, Shingon and other Buddhist sects believe that Maitreya, who is the fifth Buddha, will appear when the teachings of Gautama, the fourth Buddha, are forgotten. His arrival marking the end of the end of the middle time. We have a long time to wait because when it said he's going to be coming, he will arrive when the average human life is about 80,000 years. 80,000 years, yeah. And the oceans are so low upon the earth that's easy to cross the entire world on dry land. So I don't know. So there you have it. So I will say a few other things. So thank you, Margie, for that one. We're almost done. All right, so we're getting there. I feel like I'm climbing this mountain, making a sacred pilgrimage. Okay. I will say that in the Mesoamerica, starting with the Olmec culture, but going into the Mayans, as well as the Toltecs and the Aztecs, the religion centered upon ceremonies concerning the earth as sacred, with various features of the land understood as places connected to the gods and spirits. Sacred threshold locations were especially reverenced. These are spaces representing transitions and transformations. For instance, caves were often viewed as holy, as well as cliffs. So the idea is that cliffs, again, connect to the world above. And so the idea is that when you go on a cliff, you could just cross over into the other side, into the heavens above. So cliffs are liminal places to the sky above. And then, of course, when it comes to the earth below, it's caves. See, you see the commonality here, aren't you? Yeah, and this is in Mesoamerica. This is not even in the other area. The same kind of thing happens is that you have this idea that mountains are holy. And what do you do when it's flat? You make your own holy mountains. You get those pyramids out. Does that make sense? So once again, common phenomenology, but maybe no connection. Let's move into, because I have to talk about this. I really have to. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention. I mentioned the fact that burial sites were oftentimes ringed around these mountains, and you see that all the way through the Americas. People will be buried along the base or the threshold of these mountains. I wanted to say, I forgot to mention this, that at Ephesus, that around Mount Pion, there used to be a circular cemetery around it. And remnants of that cemetery still exist. And so unlike other places, you can, that's why you have the Library of Celsus. Celsus is buried there, even if it's in the city, because it was already designated along the Mount Pion as a holy site for burial. So I want to say that, and I forgot to mention this too, I have to say this, is as a result of that, how can I forget this? There was a temple on Mount Pion dedicated to Hecate. Yes. And then they found also a sacred Triodus that was also in Ephesus along the base of Mount Pion. So Hecate was worshipped at Mount Pion big time, connected to the realm of the dead. Okay, back to the Americas, indigenous. All right, Margie, let's go to Devil's Tower. There it is. We're on the last. We have one more mountain after this will be Shasta. We'll be finished up here. Here is Devil's Tower. Look at that. Wow, this is a very popular sacred mountain, probably because of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And it's in Wyoming, composed of various sedimentary rocks, including gypsum, red sandstone, shale, maroon siltstone, and rises about 1,267 feet above the surrounding terrain. Devil's Tower was once part of the bottom of an ancient seafloor between 225 to 1000 to 195, million years ago. But because of its unique combination of rocks, when the sea was long gone and the surrounding lands began to erode away, this tower of stone remained almost defiant to the forces of nature. Because of its unique shape, Devil's Tower was sacred to many indigenous peoples living here, obviously receiving its current name more recently by a certain Richard Irving Dodge, who escorted the Office of Indian Affairs Scientific Survey Party here in 1875. So he says, hey, this is Devil's Tower. Okay, so there it is. So it's obviously it wasn't Devil's Tower. So thank you, Margie. So let's talk about some of the stories. I love these stories. So according to the Lakota and Kiowa tribes, a group of girls were playing when they were deemed the perfect meal for some giant bears looking on, and so the pursuit began. The girls ran as fast as they could, but the giant bears, actually plural, were quickly overtaking them. And so they cried out to the Great Spirit for help, falling on their knees as they begged to be saved. Suddenly, the ground on which they stood began to rise around them, going higher and higher towards heaven, so that the bears could not reach them. The giant bears did try their best, leaving behind their giant claw marks along the side of the mountain. So the story continues that these girls actually reached the sky, being transformed into the Pleiades constellation. So I guess that's the consolation prize. Sorry. So yeah, they got a consolation prize, but this is a good consolation prize, right? So that's one story. Oh, but the Cheyenne say, well, wait, we have our own version of the story. This is less pleasant. This time there's a single giant bear chasing the girls and gobbling them up one by one, with only two sisters remaining as they flee back to their village. Here they meet two boys who they tell that this bear can only be slain by an arrow shot through the bottom of his foot. The boys tell the sisters to run to Devil's Tower and to make sure that this big bear is following them up, and to make the bear think that they're climbing up this mountain. As the bear tries to climb the tower, leaving its claw marks on the sides, the boys shoot arrows at its feet, one getting so close that the bear gets scared and runs off. Now, the Sioux version, there's another version of the Sioux version of the story. Why am I telling the stories? Because it's interesting, because everybody has a story to tell, because it stands out. The Sioux version of the story, the center of the story surrounds two boys who wandered too far from the village. The big bear now receives a name, Motto. I guess it's his motto. With claws as big as teepee poles. So Motto the bear chases the two boys when they suddenly pray to Wakatonka, the creator god, for help. The rock of Devil's Tower begins to rise as the bear leaves his claw marks behind, eventually gave up, going to rest at Blue Butto in the Black Hills. The two boys were now trapped on top of Devil's Tower. Fortunately, Wombly, the eagle, flew up to them and got them off the rock. And you're thinking, that's it. Oh, the Northern Cheyenne are going, yeah, we have our own story. Oh, okay. So here the Cheyenne, this story, I love this one. A Cheyenne fell asleep next to a buffalo head at the base of Devil's Tower, called by them Bear Lodge. And when he awoke, both he and the buffalo head were at the top of the mountain, and they were trapped. After 2 days, the man was thirsty and hungry and became desperate. So the man cried out to Great Medicine for help. When he fell asleep and woke up the next day, he was back on the ground besides the mountain, but the buffalo head was left on top. Wooden Leg, that's his name, claimed he could still see the buffalo head up there. Look, there it is. It's up there. And of course, you have that. Now, of course, you're going to have, when it comes to the Navajo, I want to mention that their lands were defined by 4 sacred mountains, and were very essential to how they understood themselves and their way of life. The traditional 4 sacred mountains of the Navajo defining their homeland are the Blanca Peak in Colorado, Mount Taylor in New Mexico, the San Francisco Peaks in Arizona, and Hesperus Peak in Colorado. Now, the 4 corners, now what they do is the 4 corners of their home, called Hogan, is designed to represent these 4 mountain peaks. So if you go into a traditional Navajo home, the old ones, those 4 corners represent the 4 sacred mountains, which used to be the territory of the Navajo, but they were forced off their land. So what happens is they're taking their land with them in a sacred sense by viewing these 4 mountains as now the 4 corners of their Hogan, of their homes. That makes sense? And so in a sense, it's still their home through this sympathetic, this magic. Now it's interesting because it has a dome-shaped roof symbolizing the heavens, and the earthen floor represents the Mother Earth. Traditionally, when a baby is born to a family, their umbilical cord is buried under the family Hogan, demonstrating the intimate relationship between the person's biological mother and, of course, their Mother Earth. Last mountain. Let's show it, Margie. Last mountain. Here we go. And my last swallow of water. There it is. Yeah, Mount Shasta. Beautiful. I thought I'd get closer to home. Okay. Mount Shasta is a very dominant mountain in Northern California and has all the more features that would make it stand out as sacred. Being 10,000 feet, not connected to any other mountain ranges, but standing by itself, very sharp in shape and often covered in snow. The mountain consists of 4 overlapping volcanic cones, and which what is called the Shastina, being the highest of all the other cones. The last time Mount Shasta erupted was 1786, erupting an average of every 600 to 800 years. So we're not due for a while. According to the Klamath tribe who lived around the slopes of Mount Shasta, Skell, the spirit of the above world, came down from heaven after creating the world at request of the Klamath chief to fight Lalo, the spirit of the below world who lived within Mount Mazam. Skell threw lava and hot rocks at Lalo to try to defeat him. Obviously, this legend refers to the eruption of these 2 mountains. So thank you, Margie. We'll go ahead and go here now. So I'm going to tell you one of my favorite stories. And I have others, but I'm going to close on this one because I'm looking at my water and we are out. So think of it as the hourglass. Well, there are other stories. Don't worry. I mean, if I didn't tell your favorite story about Shasta, believe me, I'm on page 41 and I have 44. I have all the other stories, but we just don't have time. I even have the alien theory stories and all that stuff. Okay, so here we go. I like this one. One story concerning Mount Shasta told how the spirit of above world decided to leave his realm because it was cold and created Mount Shasta to live in a warmer world, but thought the mountain looked naked. So he created trees to cover it, the first trees to exist. Wherever he walked, the snow became water, and every piece of his walking stick he broke off became people. Actually, I want to tell another story. I'll tell this story. When Mount Shasta was properly prepared, the spirit world moved his family into the mountain and kindled a fire to keep keep them warm. But Wind Spirit was acting crazy outside, and he kept blowing their fire back into their eyes down through the crater. So here you have the great spirit from above. He's in his crater. He's liking the warmth. This is great. And then there's this wind spirit and blowing the fires into his face, and he's going. So the great spirit from above says, "Hey, daughter, Can you go up there and just tell the wind spirit to stop it? So, so, so she's always supposed, he actually tells her just to peek over and tell the great wind spirit to stop blowing into the crater. So the daughter, who's known to have this red flowing hair, does more than just peek. She actually gets up and stands at the edge of the crater, and she tells that wind spirit to stop it. So she's kind of, uh, a little bit more resilient about the advice. Well, the air spirit, what he does is then grabs her by her hair and whisks her off. Oh no. Well, so what happens is that she landed amongst a family of grizzly bears who could walk upright and talk at this time, and they took care of her. And I think she had memory loss. I don't know what happened, but she's hanging out with the grizzlies, these talking, walking grizzlies. Eventually, she fell in love and married the eldest of them. So now their children did not look like either gods or bears. When the mother bear was about to die, she felt it was only right to tell the spirit of the above world what happened to his daughter. But when he arrived, he saw their children. He was so angry at the mix, he cursed the grizzly bears to walk on all fours and lose their speech. The sky god did not curse the children of his daughter because he could not, because they're partly her and him, and they became the first humans. So we are part grizzly bear and part God, combination between both. So we've learned a lot about sacred mountains. Sacred mountains are liminal spaces. They connect to the heavens above. They connect to the world here, and they connect to the underworld. They are understood as places of revelation. They're understood as places of ascension and enlightenment. They are also places connected to life and to death, and they represent these ancient beliefs of animism, that there's spirits and all kinds of things. What I think is pretty interesting when it comes to even looking at all these materials today is that remnants of that spirit or feeling of that spirit happen to be throughout all these different religions, and even into the Abrahamic religions as well, which just makes you think a little bit more deeply about the interconnection of all things. Now, next time that you are looking about your neighborhood and you see, for example, let's just put it this way: even if you're in a flat area, driving along, think like an ancient. Think like they did. What mountain or what hill in your mind would you think would be sacred by its very morphology? What stands out to you that makes you think a sense of reverence, a sense of awe, or a sense of character, like, oh, that's unusual? Because when we see something unusual in nature, it makes us sometimes think outside the box, so to speak. I know that for me, oftentimes when I see such a mountain, I do research on it, and it turns out more often than not that it was a sacred mountain. I live next to a mountain here, a hill right next to where I live. And I thought to myself, wow, it's very strange because this hill just kind of stands out. This is in California, in Fullerton, and between Fullerton and Brea. It just stands out in a morphological sense. And one time I was with this ranger, historical ranger for Orange County, and his name is Mike Miniachi. He passed on about 2 years ago. And I said, it's very unusual. This hill just kind of stands out, and it's flat all the way around. It kind of reminds me of a lot of these sacred mountains. He said, well, that's because it is a sacred mountain. It was sacred to the Akatchaban on one side and the Tongva on the other. and their sacred hunting grounds was on the other side of what is now Craig Park. Wow. Just making a guess. So your guess at what a sacred mountain could actually be an actual sacred mountain for the perception of people who once lived here. Isn't it fascinating? Anyway, I'll close on that. Thank you so much. And any questions? But I'm done. And look, I finished my waters.
Okay, so I was wondering, Mesopotamia is flat, but the Aryan mountain people came down into Mesopotamia. Did they bring their mountain with them in their minds as a place
Yes.
where gods could live, even though it was flat?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And traditionally, you have all these people coming from the mountains. And they're, it's traditional to worship on high places, for the sky gods above. Well,
Yeah,
what do you do?
just the Aryans, but I was wondering because you made a point of saying that Mesopotamia was flat.
Yeah, so what's going to happen is this: you're going to have Semitic peoples who certain Semitic peoples are coming from the hills, but what will happen is this: this is real complicated. A lot of Semitic peoples, of course, are always from the area of Arabia, but even Arabia has these sacred mountains. It's not flat, and the cool part about the ancient Middle East visiting today is that chances are good that if you climb to the top of a mountain, you're going to find remnants of a sacred site. Chances are really good. You're going to find a remnant of a podium, a altar, a temple, unless it's eroded away. And so when these various people arrived, the Semitic peoples into Mesopotamia, they had this belief, but in addition to that, other Semitic peoples also came from mountain regions, as well as you have these traditions of the Aryans too. So it's a combination. It's a stew, so to speak. But everybody seems to think, hey, the best way to get closer to the gods is a mountain. Because I guess we're going to go a little deeper here. So what happens is this. Now we're going to the next year. What happens is this, is that the world, for them, the gods are physical. They eat, they drink, they sleep, they're moody, they get drunk, they go to the restroom. They're physical. And so they reside in the canopy of heaven, on the dome of heaven, which is really close. How close is it? Well, of course, you're going to have Mesopotamian stories describing us like locusts. In Isaiah, we're described as grasshoppers. So the gods literally are on the dome of the sky, and they're looking down, and they are physical, right? So the dome is right there. Then something that is physical can possibly reach them or get closer to them, right? So if you're in a mountain, you're closer to the gods. Well, what do you do if you're in a flat land? Well, you got to make it so to get a little closer, because this is tradition. And so you're going to have them making these holy mountains. And a lot of people say, how do you know these are holy mountains? Because inscriptions say, hey, these are holy mountains. I have people go contest this. I'm like, they're calling them holy mountains for goodness sakes. What part of the Akkadian are you not reading? So does that make it? So yes, they are holy mountains, right? So, and then of course with the Mesopotamian civilization also, it's filled with all these gods that are connected with mountains. And in a sense, the earth at first was viewed as a mountain in and of itself. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Any other questions? Oh, you put them in chat. Okay, Julian. Okay, so I will go there. So lots of questions here. My chat working? Okay, let's see. Oh, Jane, could like to know more about other local sacred mountains. So the big one, of course, is the one where um, uh, uh, State College goes up and meets Bassin Cherry. That's definitely a big one. Another big one, which I didn't have time to talk about, was Mount San Jacinto. Is another really holy mountain, Jane. And this, of course, is it's called the Gathering Mountain because it was here upon its slopes that those living around gathered their special plants used for medicine as well as much of their food. But it was another holy mountain. So, and in fact, for the Angeles, or I should say the Tongva Indians, indigenous peoples, there's a story of their maker god. And this god, when he made the world, his hands were dirty. So he wiped his hands on clouds. And those clouds became the mountains behind us in Pasadena. And so, yeah. So, I mean, so there, but that means that it's infused with this holy energy. So is this interesting?
Yes, and I had to leave the room for just a second. Of course, when you were talking about some type of mountain or area that had a flat top,
Well, yeah,
just about 5 minutes ago.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I was talking about Spanish Shasta, Jacinto. I'm not sure
No,
which one.
I think it was local because it was with your friend Mike.
Oh no, that's the one right here. That's the one where State College.
Oh, that's the one. Oh, I see. So you just mentioned it twice. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
And where is it flat?
Well, it's not flat, but but you notice how it stands out. Take a look at it morphologically.
I
You
will.
know, when you're driving, you're going like this, going wow, go way up, right? And then you go way down. Sarah saw it. We'll claim it eventually. But it goes straight up, and then it kind of goes right and straight down. So it before all the houses, it really stood out to the indigenous peoples.
You know, and I'd like to say just briefly too on that. I know when I was growing up in Garden Grove, my grandparents used to always point at Saddleback and say, "Here's how you can orient yourself. You can, no matter where you are, you'll always know where you are if you look at Saddleback." So I know that people before we came used to do that, obviously.
Yep.
That was those were sacred peaks. But in the Fullerton area, the West Coyote Hills near Euclid and just north of Rosecrans, that was the highest elevation for miles down into until you got to Huntington Beach. And so
Mike
that
mentioned
must
that
have
was
been a place that people recognized as well with the buttes up there.
Yes, and there's another one. Long Beach. You know how there's that Signal Hill.
Yes.
Another one.
Signal Hill. Makes sense. Makes sense.
See, so you look around, going, "Oh yeah, isn't that fun?" I think it'd be a fun assignment. Take a look at the hills and find out, then do the history and see if it's holy or not to the indigenous peoples. So, and then the interesting part is when you get to the flatlands, Kansas or Nebraska, there's sacred hills there too, but they stand out because they're all of a sudden just kind of stick out in the horizon, and then archaeologists go there and they discover stuff. Yeah, so anything to break the monotony of the flatness, right? It'll become a sacred site, which again tells a lot about who we are, right? Yeah. So I got that. What's another question here? Am I going earlier? Oh, okay, I do here. Okay. Okay. Okay, Julian says it was because David, having a man of war, killed people that he couldn't build a place of peace, the temple. Yeah, he also had the Bathsheba thing, and he said, "Hey, Bathsheba, I like you," because he was peeping Tom, or he was peeping David. But the worst part is he sent Uriah, her husband, to the front lines, and he got killed, and that was not good. So. Never a good end there. I heard previously, says Julian, connection between Sinai mountain name and the Hebrew for hatred. Yeah, yeah. That's the running one that you're going to see in many more conservative Jewish circles, because they don't want to associate with Sinai, the moon deity of northern Arabia. So that's so it's easier for hatred. But it hadn't occurred to me before the name means hatred, that hatred burns, right? And then you're going to have him talk about the fact that it's a burning hatred, but then he makes some strange connection with the flame of inspiration. I'm thinking that seems like a really weak, the burning bush. I'm thinking that's a really weak. I don't see any hatred there at all. So I think it's somebody who's just working so hard to have it not say the other thing. So and it comes up pretty strange, but hey, you know what? Maybe it's right. I don't think so. A large portion of scholars say, well, sin Sinai. Done. You know. Okay, moving on. Mount Kalish having 4 rivers sounds like the Garden of Eden with its 4 rivers. Could there be a connection? Yeah, 4 is a big. 4 is a. Yeah. So you're going to have this idea of just the significance of rivers, of 4 rivers in other connections. I mean, you can also have not just 4, but 2 rivers. Like you're going to see that in Armenia. You're going to have the river of the underworld, the river of the overworld coming forth. Once again, it has to do with. I'll cut right to it. Has to do with starting things out and getting bigger. You start with a spring, it becomes a brook, becomes a stream, becomes a river. And so a lot of creation stories have this idea of the flowing forth of life. This idea, we're going to go a little deeper. Here we go. Deeper. This idea is connected to, of course, within the Hebrew Bible and into the New Testament, the idea of the spring of life and Jesus as that spring. A spring that emanates, that flows forth, that is a creative principle. Does that make sense? So I know I had to go there, but there we go. All right. So yes, maybe a lecture on indigenous holy mountains and high places could be on another date. What? Holy, oh yes. Oh yeah. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I could do that. That takes more research. So, okay. Let's see here. My mouth is dry. Sorry, my water's out. We did them all the questions. I covered it. Oh yeah, thank you, Julianne. Was this fun? Did you guys feel like you learned a lot? Yeah. So. And I even went to Ephesus a little bit. So, well, take what you've learned, because in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing the Ideodactyls. And so this will be a nice context as we jump even further into the topic. Julian says, thanks. I was also saying, hey, hatred as burning mountain or volcano could work as a symbol. It also resonates with the Lord of the Rings idea of Mount Mordor being an evil place. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and Margie likes the connection with Doom and Mordor. So there you have it. You know, of course, it looks like we have our own potential Mount Mordors in different places here, right? Some of those volcanoes. A little bit worried about Mount Ararat because it's about due to erupt. So there goes all that. So we'll see what happens, because the last time was in the 1800s. So it is, and the last time before that was the 1700s. You see where I'm going? It skipped the 20th century. So anyway, all right. No more questions. Oh, Julian, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks. I thought to qualify what I was saying before. So when you were saying about the 4, the spring of life, being like a spring of life, I was also thinking, I think also the 4 archangels, and I think you also mentioned
Cardinal points.
yeah. So, and then we've got the square. I don't know how else it could be connected, but
Yeah, and of course, it was looked at as a mandala from the Hindu perspective as well as the Buddhist perspective. So the cardinal direction there. So there's a mystical, as you know, but there is this idea of origins. Mountains start things. Everything begins on a mountain, and a lot of these ancient stories has a mountain starting at the beginning. You know, or the earth is a mountain. The world is a mountain, which is fascinating because that leads to another kind of talk, and that is you have the idea of holy trees. And holy trees can also be the axis mundi in many ways. So we get into, so those ideas will cross. And that would be another good talk to do. I have a holy sacred tree talk that's already done. So just saying, it's out there. So
Someone asked if you could do the one on Eleustia again, the Minoan snake goddess, because we don't have a recording of that lecture. Would you be interested in representing that?
well, I remember I already did, didn't I?
No, we don't have a copy of the lecture. It wasn't recorded. It was done in 2020.
Yeah, I'll do it. Yeah.
It was a really good lecture.
I'll do the Minoan goddess. Yeah. Would you guys like that? Going into, yeah. And piece it together through Linear B and yeah.
Okay, we'll set
Yeah,
that
we'll
up.
do it. All right. Well, I think I covered all the questions. We're all happy.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Again.
you. All right. So next time, ID and dactyls, and next time after that,
The Minoan snake goddess,
we're doing
Mhm.
Minoans. Okay.
Eleustia.
All right. Great.
Great.
Right. Thank you. And thank
Very
you.
nice.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night,
All right.
everyone. Thank you for doing
Good
this.
night. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you, Margie.
Night.
James.
Thank you, Margie.
Come by for money.